Hello, August. How are you? It's Past Podcast. We'll be recording every day for the month of August. Having to remember not to say April is an adjustment since I just did this a couple of months ago. But this is the past, or the Past Podcast. And we're podcasting each day in August. So check out the show. You might find something new. It is the greatest feeling when you realize that you can use a program to its max potential, and it'll give you reminders of what your status of your show or your podcast should be, so that way I'm not behind on episodes. So we are officially on episode 113 of the past. I am your host, BT, doing yet another episode. I hope everyone's Sunday is going well. We're chipping at this podcast every day in August, and I'll be the first to admit that it's going a lot better than I expected. I've literally been able to project a pretty good amount of shows, and I'm gonna get into some apologies in a moment, and then I'll go into the show and kind of break down why it'll kind of tie to the reasons of the apology. But of course, the episodes are being recorded using the Blue Yeti microphone, and these episodes are uploaded each day. Sorry for the rumbling in the background. These episodes are recorded using they're recorded using the Blue Yeti, and they're uploaded to Spreaker.com. If you want to check out those links, I do have them in the description. And also, I do want to share, because I always forget to mention them, because it's kind of like helpful to get them out there as well. If you're looking to get like non-copyrighted music that you can play in a podcast and not have to go through any copyright conflicts or issues, you definitely can go ahead and check out jukebox.com. They're pretty good. I've changed mine up a couple of times and found some pretty solid listens here and there, so just something to check out as a suggestion or an option. Alright, so the apology is, I realized when I was doing shows I did a show on Thursday related to depression, if I'm not mistaken. Let me make sure so I'm not giving you the wrong order. Sorry. I did the episode on schizophrenia on Thursday. And then on Friday, instead of kind of piggybacking and continuing that flow or that storyline, I kind of swerved a little bit and jumped into actually, you know what, I take that back. It may have been, I know, like, there was one episode where I did schizophrenia. Then I was thinking of, I need to do the halfway point and kind of review how the podcast has come along so far with listening. Then, of course, the weekend sports show came, and it's just kind of been a mental catch-up in so many words. And like I said, I'm not using it for any excuses or looking for any clarification, but I do want to make sure that I stick to the plan with kind of addressing a couple mental illnesses and just some stories that kind of stood out for me that I've not personally witnessed firsthand, but have learned in knowing that it's not something to mildly address like it doesn't exist. And today's episode is actually about dealing with depression, and it's kind of gonna be a mix and match, because it's going to be related to depression and something that I was introduced to or learned about with a current NFL wide receiver who suffers from a mental illness or mental health known as borderline personality disorder. So I'm going to talk about those stories and then kind of let this podcast kind of flow for itself. So first thing I'm going to do is talk about, I do have a link, and I'll share make sure I give the link to everyone. But it talks about the signs of depression, and there are 9 signs of depression. So a lot of times it could be something that you may naturally have experienced and may not know it. So you don't want to, if you acknowledge it like it doesn't exist, then 9 times out of 10 is something that could have an impact on you in the long haul without knowing it. So the first sign is hopeless outlook. It's mainly, major depression is a mood disorder that affects the way you feel about life in general. When you're hopeless or helpless, or your outlook are in those categories, it's the most common symptom of depression. It kind of triggers down into feeling worthlessness, or having worthlessness, self hate, or inappropriate guilt. Or it's kind of, stating you key cues or key terms you'll hear constantly. Maybe it's all my fault, or what's the point? That's just examples they use, but it can be other ways of triggering or realizing that you've come across that. Number 2 is lost interest. It can be, it's basically like having a withdrawal from activities that you once used to be into. And I'll admit, this one may be close to me, because I know for a fact, little stuff like video games. I went through a stage of this where things like video games, music, everything, entertainment, things that I like doing, I didn't do them because I started to kind of have a slight amount of depression, feeling slightly depressed about certain things. So they use examples of sports, hobbies, or going out with friends, kind of a way of possibly being either running into depression. Number 3, increased fatigue and sleep problems. A lot of times, anytime if you have a lack of energy or an overwhelming feeling of fatigue, it's a debilitating symptom of depression. It could which does then lead to excessive sleeping. Anxiety is a huge one, and it's, like I said, this kind of ties into the story that I was mentioning before, or mentioned earlier. While depression hasn't been shown to cause anxiety, if they occurred, often they occur together. Anxiety and depression. Symptoms of anxiety: nervousness, restlessness or feeling tense, feelings of danger, panic, or dread, rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, increased or heavy sweating, trembling or muscle twitching, trouble focusing on or thinking clearly about anything other than the thing you're worried about. Now, this is number 5. I guess they're basing it. This probably is a women's based site, but they say irritability in men, and men are also less likely than women to recognize depression or seek treatment for it. And that's a very valid statement, because when it comes to guys, I'll come clean and saying it. I'm not a huge fan of going to the doctor, but also knowing in hindsight, if it's something that can help me, I'm going to do what I need to do, because I want to live as long as possible and, be here to help those who have helped me through whatever has gone on. Number 6, changes in appetite and weight. It's a case by case situation where your weight and your appetite can just fluctuate along the way. And that could be a sign of depression as well. Or a symptom of depression. Uncontrollable emotions. It's kind of it's literally like mood swings. You kind of can feel one way, one moment everything's fine and everything's good, and then the next minute you're ready to punch a wall and lose your mind. So that's another symptom or another sign to keep an eye out for. Number 8, huge story, looking at death, like you're thinking of the likelihood of possibly dying when it's not your time, or you're putting plans into place about trying to kill yourself or things of that sort. Thankfully, I've never reached that point. Like I've hit frustrating walls numerous times, but luckily the frustration has never reached or gotten to that extreme, so I'm very thankful for that. And on the site they also give, and this is a number that always is shared constantly, it's the National Suicide Prevention Line. If you're not able to access the site or access the podcast, look at the show notes for the podcast, the phone number is 1-800-273-8255. I need to be checking if I'm recording, sorry. And those are the signs that they have. I mentioned 9, and then they also factor in whether it could actually be depression. Sometimes we get the two confused as far as being unhappy and being depressed, like putting them in the same category. It's it's just one of those things. It's part of the part of the design part of life. So just something to think about. So the reason this story triggered is, like I said, I was looking at the story when they talked about Skylar Rue, and a person who ran into her coincidentally was Shamika Holdsclaw, who herself, she's experienced depression as well, because she had to kind of reprocess her thought process, her routine when it came to dealing with depression at the time. She was drafted. Shamika Holdsclaw was the number 1 draft pick in the WNBA back in 1999. She had a great career in Tennessee, and she was, her coach was Pat Summitt, who was battling with dementia, and I believe it's now been a couple of years since Pat Summitt passed. But let's see, they mainly, it's the article just kind of talks about just breaking down the process of it, saying the book. So there was a portion of it stating that in 2006, Holdsclaw had a low point in her life. She had requested a trade to leave Washington to go to LA. She had started to kind of fall into that depressing stage. She looked up at the ceiling of an ambulance, confused. She soon realized that she was being rushed to Centinela Hospital in LA. As we tore down the street, the sounds of flowing oxygen and machines controlling my heart filled the air. The EMTs hovered above my body, taking my blood pressure and doing their best to keep me alive. I went in and out of consciousness, wondering how I'd let it get this far. I was taught to be stronger than this, and yet here I was, possibly minutes away from my death. And then it just goes into a more detailed graphic of what happened. And she didn't, it's then referenced that Holdsclaw stated she thought it was important to catch readers in the beginning with this moment, because it was the first time she realized she needed help and couldn't fight depression alone. And that's an important factor as well, or something to really look at. Sometimes we want to do everything on our own. We try to handle it ourselves because we feel like we got it, but in most cases we can't do it by ourselves. And then our biggest challenge too is sometimes we can be very stubborn in addressing things, because we look at it like, if everything is okay, it's kind of almost the analogy of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the reality is, if something really is broke, then you may need to fix it, because you don't want it to get any worse. So like I said, now if you look at, like I said, if you just read the story, she just kind of makes it clear, like she made it her goal to just kind of recover from everything that went on. And she also mentioned that what triggered depression, and what was the strongest point of it, was her grandmother passed in June of 2002. I know for me, I've lost a lot of family members, friends, or people that have been close to me, and trying to deal with it and address it is not the easiest thing. And I'm going to go into that story in a couple of days, because I know in October I have a lot of stuff that I want to implement into the podcast that I think will be I won't say fun, but it'll be helpful to give people a better eye, or a better understanding, or better ear towards the issue of domestic violence. And I'll talk about that at that time. And the other story that I found was related to, and I mentioned it earlier. He was previously with the Chicago Bears. He just recently went to the New York Giants. Well, he's been with a couple of teams since then. But he's currently with the New York Giants. Brandon Marshall, he did a public service announcement talking about the mental illness that he experiences, known as BPD, or borderline personality disorder. It's a mental illness characterized by a persistent instability of emotions, relationships, and behaviors. Now, since he's experienced that and went through that process back in 2011, he was diagnosed with that disorder. But he's now become an advocate and making others aware of how serious it is. And it's a video that's online that shows kind of his public service announcement talking about it, and just being stronger than the cause. It's good. And the thing, I guess, what helps this why I'm bringing this up is because sometimes we know we need help, but we don't want to ask for help because it's a pride thing, and we try to go through everything like it's all right. And it's kind of ironic, because a friend of mine who I've known from growing up at the Boys and Girls Club here in my area for years, he We associated and we talked with each other from time to time, but it was not always consistent. You know, life happens, so it's understandable. But he reached out to me today, and he just kind of been giving me some touching words, and it's kind of like, okay, sometimes you have to learn to put differences aside and let stuff go, and that's kind of been my newest challenge with people and with myself, is to let things go and stop, stop making something more than what it is when it shouldn't be that much to begin with. And I can always say time and time again, that's easier said than done sometimes, but you trying to fight a battle alone knowing you can't is it already makes the process that much more challenging. So it's just something to think about. It's something to look at. But I'm just, like I said, I'm just recording this podcast today to bring up the other topics that I have related to mental illness. Tomorrow I will be getting into anxiety, because I feel like that's a huge one that sometimes goes unnoticed. So I'll address that as well. As always, thanks for tuning in. This is your host, BT with the Pass, signing out. Take it easy. Another episode complete. Another show shared. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you checking out any current shows or previous episodes. If you'd like to follow me on social media, you can look me up on the Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter under Pass Podcast. If you'd like to go to the website, it is available at passpodcast.com, where you can listen to this episode as well as previous episodes. Until next time, y'all take it easy.